So we're going to move into the next one, next section where we're looking at community and care. And I'm going to do a quick interview with Anne Gardner, who's the head of school of professional practice in engineering. And Anne, I'll start the conversation if, Anne, I've watched your wonderful MS Team site where you've got a number of things around school structures, but you've also got a wellness and resilience and a flourishing site. Do you want to tell us a little bit, what's your view on how the community works, in how care works for you as a head of school?
Well, there's a couple of underlying principles in what we do. One is that staff are whole people. They're three-dimensional beings, and that at work we only see part of their whole life. They've got a whole other part of life and other roles that are actually more important than being a worker at UTS. Don't tell Attila I said that, but anyway. Another underlying principle is that if we can't expect staff to demonstrate a culture of care with their students if we're not creating a culture of care for them. And so that's why, first of all, we set up the team site to help staff keep connected while we're working from home. The site does have different channels for different programs in the school, but we also have the general channel, we have a coffee break channel, and we've got the wellness and resilience channel as well. So the other thing that I really appreciate is that I'm not doing a lot of the posting. It's a group effort. So we have a...
We've got a team of 3 that work around this. So.
Yeah, we do. So the school manager, Trish, posts a lot of inspirational material. So she might start the morning off every day with a great poster or a quote or a photo to try and lift our spirits and get us through the next, that day. The site also works in tandem with our weekly school meetings, which do allow me to get information out to staff, but most of the time I like to focus on what are the issues and questions that staff have. So they get to ask the collected brains trust of people in the school how to solve that problem or where to go to solve that problem. So the school also, or the school meetings and the team site includes people from other schools as well. So it's not just our school, we've sort of had this outreach effect to other people in the faculty because I think people have been looking for some way to connect to other people.
And that's an important need where you're connecting with that weekly meeting, regular time. And I think you were saying that part of this culture of care comes from your teaching process.
Well, it sort of grew out of that.
Yes.
And really links back to that, to that underlying principle of we want our staff to care for our students. So as managers and leaders, we should be caring for our staff as well.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thank you. And Anne I've known for a long time, and she's behind Spark. She's a wonderful teaching and learning academic, as a researcher as well, and it's great this team is running. Thank you, Anne. So I'm going to move on to Tyler, because Tyler's going to present us a view of community and build us concepts of belonging and connection and care. Thanks, Tyler.
Hi, everyone.
Now,
just going to remove my virtual background, which is a bit distracting. Oh, not that one either.
That's fine.
Why don't we leave that one, actually? We're there. And I'm just going to present some slides here. So give me a few seconds to load this up.
So while Tyler's doing that, Tyler's from TDI. He's a first and further year coordinator from that faculty. I forgot to mention that Simone is a first and further year coordinator from business. Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of building off what Anne is doing and the conversation Anne and Kathy had just there, and the theme for today, which is kind of building a culture of care in a community. So the way I've kind of framed this is more of a kind of provocation and kind of thinking through what do communities in cultures of care look like? What do they mean? What are we talking about? Just as some kind of, a provocation as you kind of go back into your units, classes, wherever you're kind of working, because we're all different staff from different places, as different ways to think about it and how you might change the way that you're working. So if we're talking about communities of care, what we really need to kind of start to think about is care itself. And so you have care, you have cared, you're caring. I care for you, I care for my students. If you're in a health context, they say, I cared for my patient. You might say they are really caring. And then we also have this concept from a kind of governance structure or responsibility is a duty of care. And this is kind of where I want to pick up is in a university, this duty of care, this responsibility is very kind of paramount. And the thing I like to think about is we need to put our gas masks on first. I know a lot of us haven't been on a plane for a long time, but this is the kind of way I think a bit about our duty of care. And if you think back to your first aid, you need to make sure that you're safe so that you can then look after someone else. And so the kind of structure that I've kind of thought this through is our managing staff have a duty of care over the staff. And then if you're in a classroom, the staff have a duty of care over the students in the class to some degree. And then it's interesting to start to think about how does this then look onto success. So a lot of our metrics as staff, if you're teaching, is kind of based on the student results and how well the students are going, the SFS results. And then if that went well, you got good SFS, those staff results mean that the managing staff kind of get better results and they're more successful. Which is just kind of an interesting thing to think about, I think. And what we're starting to talk about here is this culture of care has to exist in a context. And we're talking about this culture of care in specific communities. And with our communities, the way that we're kind of thinking about communities is there is some mutual interest, there's a shared purpose, and there's a sense of reciprocity. When you start to think about the connections and links between what is a community and what is culture, both culture and communities have a way of being, a way of working, or a way of doing. And some of these concepts can be seen. So you have your rules, your law, your governance, and then some of them can't be seen. So your social norms or your unsaid rules. And this lovely little iceberg model is a really fantastic tool to start to dissect some of these explicit and inexplicit concepts that kind of exist in our communities and our culture, where a lot of the stuff you can see on the surface, but at the end of the day, there's really these thoughts, beliefs, and values that really drive what is a community, what is the culture. And bringing this to the UTS context, we have different levels of community. So you start on a very broad level. We have UTS as a whole. We then go down into a faculty or a unit, depending if you're in a professional staff as well. And then there's schools. You then have a course or a team or a community of practice, which is where I think we're kind of at. Then you have a subject and then a peer group. So different staff and different students can see themselves at all of these different levels. And as we were talking about before, both communities and cultures have different practices, different behaviors, and they all have different thoughts and values and beliefs. So each of these different levels of the community actually has a different style of culture and a different way to engage. But the one key thing is I can show people an example of all those different levels of community that may or may not exist. But coming off the back of the Belonging Project and those amazing poems, we actually start to realize you can identify a lot of these different levels of community, but at the end of the day, what really matters is actually having a sense of belonging and a sense of identity to some of these different levels of our community. And so if you're a student in a class and you don't feel that sense of belonging within your subject or within your course, that's when things start to get very challenging, as we've heard about. And belonging is this innate human desire to be part of something larger than us. And we often try to acquire it by fitting in or seeking approval. And so for our students, or when you were a student, or even as a staff member in work, and in our own work cultures, it's really clear to tell those moments when you feel like you're trying to fit in, rather than there's that sense of belonging that's being developed. And the real difference here between this fitting in and the belonging is where fitting in is you assess the situation and you become who you need to be accepted. Whereas belonging doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires to be who we are. And this is where the concepts that Anne was talking about in her communities is we're actually recognizing that people are a three-dimensional person. Someone might be a parent, and that's what they actually find their sense of purpose is in. They love being a parent, and it's how do we accept them for that love of being a parent, whereas someone else just loves working and they want to work down that career route. And how can they be accepted for who they are in the classroom? And this extends to the importance of where with students and working with diverse students, we need to allow different students of different races and kind of sexual orientation to be who they are and work with each other, and this kind of allow for this inclusivity. And this starts to lead to the challenge that we face is for staff to do our jobs well, we need to be well and motivated. And for students to learn well, they need to be well and motivated. And so we start talking about there's things that you need to be well and there's things that you need to be motivated. They're a little bit different. And I'm not going to touch on these too much, but the main thing that I want to pull out of here is that in both of these instances, these relationships and social health in the middle here relationships are a very key part of being well. And at the same time, relatedness is a key part of being motivated from self-determination theory. And so if we start to look at relatedness, what is relatedness? It's that people need to care about and be cared about by others to feel connected without ulterior motives. And coming back to this difference between knowing and connecting with each other is that connection that happens is when their energy exchanges between people. And if you think back to a time when you felt a connection with someone rather than just knowing them, there's a very big difference in how that relationship is perceived. And that's where that sense of belonging actually starts to come through, is when you are listening openly and you have that exchange with someone, you can actually feel that real sense of connection with someone or something. It doesn't have to be a person. And this is where that sense of belonging starts to come from, is where you can connect with someone and feel that relatedness, feel that energy between each other. And this is where that sense of belonging really stems from. And the kind of bigger question here is, as a staff member or as a student, what's the difference between how many people you know versus how many people you've connected with? In your work area, how many people have you actually connected with on that and sense that energy and connectedness between each other? As a student, or thinking back to when you were a student, How many people did you actually have a conversation with and feel like you could connect with them and feel that energy in the room through those conversations?
We'll have to finish, Tyler, soon.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, coming back to the things that we need to be well, things to be motivated. So we need engaged relationships to be well, and we need this sense of relatedness to be motivated. For staff, not going to touch too much on this, but this is the challenge we face for students to learn well. And this comes back to exactly what the Belonging Project is kind of working on, is students spend the majority of their time in the classroom where they may or may not feel a sense of belonging to the subject or to the university. And due to this lack of belonging, they may not reach out for support from us as staff or even the university services themselves that are there for them to support them. And what I really want to kind of get you to take away is we spend so much time in our work focusing on the content or the delivery, but where I think it kind of comes down to is how can we actually embed 5 to 15 minutes, whether that's in the classroom with your students or in the case of Anne, in the work community. We're actually developing a culture of care in our communities. How can we actually make sure to prioritize that so that not only are we as staff well and motivated, but our students are well and motivated and therefore more successful.
Thank you. Thank you, Tyler.